Welcome, traveller, to Stormwind City. As you make your way north from the golden fields of Elwyn Forest, you'll find yourself approaching one of the most magnificent sights in all of Azeroth, the Valley of Heroes, and beyond it, the great white walls of humanity's greatest remaining stronghold. Let us begin our journey at the very threshold of the city, where stone and memory intertwine. Section 1. The Approach and First Impressions. The Valley of Heroes. As you cross the bridge that spans the narrow moat before Stormwind's main gate, you'll notice something remarkable on either side of you. Rising from pedestals of carved stone are massive statues, each depicting a hero of the Alliance. These aren't just decorative monuments. Each one tells a story of sacrifice, of courage, of warriors who marched into darkness and never returned. On your left, you will see the towering figure of Curdran Wildhammer, the Thane of Airy Peak, his weathered features captured in stone, his connection to his griffin evident even in this frozen moment. Beside him stands Archmage Khadgar, robed and bearing a staff, his long beard flowing. These statues were erected to honour members of the Alliance expedition, those brave souls who travelled through the Dark Portal into the Orc homeworld of Draenor to seal the dimensional rift from the other side. On your right stand two more figures of legend. Force Commander Daneth Trollbane holds his helmet in one hand, a sword strapped to his back, his posture one of eternal vigilance. Next to him is Ranger Captain Illyria Windrunner, her elven features sharp and focused, forever scanning some distant horizon that only she can see. And at the end of this processional, just before the path splits to enter Stormwind City proper, stands General Turilion himself. He holds a broken sword in one hand and a book in the other, symbols of both warfare and faith. The military leader of the expedition memorialized in gleaming stone. Each of these statues bears a plaque at its base. If you were to stop and read them, you'd find words written by those who knew these heroes best. Uther the Lightbringer wrote of Turalion, "You were the right hand of justice and virtue, old friend. Your name will be honoured in our halls always." Sylvanas Windrunner, before her fall, wrote of her sister Illyria, "Your heart flew straight as any arrow upon the wind, sister. You were the brightest of our order." These aren't just statues, they're promises. Promises that sacrifice will be remembered, that valour will be honoured, that the path these heroes walked will never be forgotten. Every player who enters Stormwind for the first time passes beneath their stone gaze, and something shifts in that moment. You're not just entering a city, you're entering a legacy. The Valley of Heroes ties Stormwind visually to the events of the Second War and beyond, creating a sense of historical weight before you even set foot in the trade district. The lush valley itself is carefully manicured, green and peaceful, a stark contrast to the martial nature of these monuments. It's as if the city is saying, "We have known war, we've lost heroes, but we endure, and beauty persists even in the shadow of sacrifice." The sound of home. But before we step through those massive gates, close your eyes for a moment and listen. Do you hear it? That sweeping orchestral theme that begins to play as you approach the city? That's Stormwind's signature music, composed by Jason Hayes for the original release of World of Warcraft. This isn't just any background music. This is a piece of orchestral work that has become deeply embedded in the identity of every Alliance player who has ever called Stormwind home. The composition features sweeping strings, powerful brass sections, and a choir that lifts the entire piece into something transcendent. It's both calm and heroic at once, mixing peaceful motifs with triumphant crescendos in a way that perfectly captures what Stormwind represents. A bastion of hope in a world still recovering from war. What's fascinating about this music is how it loops. If you spend enough time in Stormwind, which many players do, you begin to notice the seamlessness of it. The track cycles back on itself without any jarring transitions, creating a continuous atmosphere. But there's something subtle that happens during the bridge entry, a slight crescendo, a shift in the orchestration that many players subconsciously time their walks to. You might not realize you're doing it, but your character's stride often matches the rhythm of that swell. It's a small detail, but it's one of thousands that makes Stormwind feel alive. For long-time fans of World of Warcraft, hearing this music start instantly teleports mental images into place. Close your eyes and let those first few notes play, and suddenly you can see the marble steps leading up from the canals, the griffins roosting in their tower, the fountain in the trade district catching the afternoon light. The music is so strongly associated with the city that hearing it anywhere, even outside the game, brings all of those memories flooding back. What makes Stormwind's theme particularly special is that it's distinct from other Alliance music. When you're in Elwynn Forest, you hear a different track, something lighter and more pastoral. When you travel to Ironforge, the dwarven capital, you're greeted with a completely different musical identity, something heavier and more industrial. But Stormwind has its own orchestral soul, and that soul became deeply intertwined with what it meant to be Alliance in classic World of Warcraft. Over the years, over the months and weeks of playing, something interesting happens. You begin to identify Stormwind, not just by sight, but by sound. The fountain splashes as you pass. The footsteps of guards echo off the stone walls. Distant bells toll from the Cathedral district. The music swells. All of these audio cues layer together to create what might be called an audio memory of the city. This soundscape familiarity is part of why returning to Stormwind feels so deeply nostalgic, even after taking long breaks from the game. You could be away from World of Warcraft for years, and then one day you return, you create a new character, you walk through those gates, and the moment that music starts, the moment you hear those fountain splashes and guard patrols, it all comes flooding back. Muscle memory takes over. Your fingers remember the keybinds, your mind remembers the layout, and something in your chest tightens just a little because you're home. Day and night, time passes differently in Azeroth than it does in our world, and Stormwind transforms as day turns to night. If you've only ever seen the city during daylight hours, you're missing something special. At night, in classic World of Warcraft, Stormwind takes on a different personality altogether. The lanterns flicker to life along the walkways. Torches, mounted on walls, cast dancing shadows across the white stone. The canals reflect these lights, doubling them in the dark water below. And the shadows grow longer, deeper, particularly in districts like Old Town, where the streets are narrower and the buildings lean in close. There's something almost magical about Stormwind at night, especially if you're role-playing or if you're simply taking a moment to appreciate the atmosphere. The daytime bustle of merchants and adventurers gives way to a quieter energy. Oh, the city is never truly empty, but at night It feels more intimate somehow, more personal. The same fountain in the trade district that seemed merely functional during the day becomes almost romantic under moonlight and lamp glow. Old Town in particular transforms at night. During the day, it's a district of rogues and spies, yes, but it's also just another part of the city's infrastructure. At night, though, with those darker shadows and that torchlight flickering across the narrow alleys, it genuinely feels dangerous. You can almost imagine the Defias Brotherhood slinking through those shadows, or 7 agents watching from darkened doorways. This day-night contrast did something interesting for the community. Late-night PvP raids by the Horde felt more dramatic when they happened at night. Roleplay gatherings in Cathedral Square or in the Park District carried a different energy after dark. Even something as simple as standing on the keep steps with your guild felt more ceremonial, more important when you could look out over the city and see all those lights twinkling in the darkness. The developers at Blizzard understood something fundamental about atmosphere. Light and shadow aren't just visual effects, they're emotional tools. They change how we feel about spaces. And in giving Stormwind this dual nature, this day face and this night face, they created a city that felt more real, more lived in, than a simple static environment ever could. The journey inward. Let's talk about that walk now, the one every new human character makes. You've crossed the Valley of Heroes, you've passed beneath the gaze of those stone sentinels. The massive gates of Stormwind loom before you, and beyond them, you can see the beginning of the city proper. From this main gate, through the Valley of Heroes, to the Trade District hub, where most of the city's services are concentrated, is actually quite a long walk for a new player just arriving from Elwynn Forest. In a world where modern game design might favour convenience and quick access, this distance could seem like a mistake. But it's not. It's intentional, and it's brilliant. That distance gives the city a sense of scale and ceremony. Entering Stormwind for the first time doesn't feel like just zoning into a compact hub where everything is immediately available. It feels like a journey. It feels like a pilgrimage. You're not simply fast travelling to a services menu. You're approaching something significant, something that took effort to reach, something that means something. Think about it from the perspective of that new player. You've spent your first few hours, or your first evening in Goldshire, in the farms of Elwynn Forest. You've fought kobolds in the mines, you've killed wolves for their pelts, you've helped farmers with their crops, and through all of it, quest NPCs have been telling you about Stormwind. You should report to Stormwind, they say. The city has need of adventurers, they mention. It builds anticipation. So when you finally make that walk north, when you finally cross that bridge and pass those statues and walk through those gates, it pays off. The city sprawls before you. The music swells, and that long walk from the entrance to the central hub gives you time to take it all in. You see the canals cutting through the city. You see other players running past, some on mounts, some on foot, all heading to different destinations. You see the white stone architecture rising around you. You see the griffins circling above the flight tower. This is what we mean by visual identity. From the moment you enter Stormwind, you understand what the Alliance represents. The bright stone, the blue banners, the symmetric canals, the orderly districts, The Gothic-inspired architecture of the Cathedral rising in the distance. All of it creates a strong Alliance capital aesthetic that contrasts sharply with what Horde players experience in Orgrimmar. If you've ever played Horde, you know. Orgrimmar is spikes and red tones, harsh angles and fortified walls, a city built for war and survival. Stormwind is aspirational. Stormwind reaches upward. Stormwind says, "We have been through darkness, but we build toward light. We create beauty even in the aftermath of destruction. We hold civilization together, even as the world threatens to tear it apart." This design helped new players instantly understand faction aesthetics just by stepping through the gate. You didn't need to read quest text or watch a cutscene. You could look around you and understand what the Alliance stood for simply through architecture and atmosphere. The emotional weight of home. Many classic players treat Stormwind as more than just a convenient place to access services. They treat it as a psychological home base. It's where you return after leveling in Westfall or the Red Ridge Mountains. It's where you come back to after your first dungeon run in the Dead Mines. It's where you set your hearthstone once you've outgrown Goldshire. Even when other cities might be more efficient for what you need, there's something that draws players back to Stormwind. Maybe it's that music. Maybe it's that emotional connection established during the human starting experience. Maybe it's simply that Stormwind feels like the heart of the Alliance in a way that no other city quite captures, not even Ironforge with its mountain halls. This emotional attachment is part of why Stormwind remains iconic even as gameplay systems change across different expansions and different versions of World of Warcraft. The game has evolved, class design has changed, quest structures have been revamped, but Stormwind endures as a symbol, as a feeling, as a place that means home to millions of players who have walked its streets. For human characters especially, Stormwind represents a kind of graduation. You start in the small village of Northshire, barely more than a few buildings and a training ground. You move to Goldshire, a slightly larger settlement with an inn and some basic services. And then you reach Stormwind, the destination capital that was promised by all those Elwyn Forest quests. Reaching Stormwind feels like you've made it. You're no longer in the beginner zone. You're in the big world now, surrounded by high-level characters with impressive gear, watching trade chat scroll by with conversations about raids and dungeons you haven't even heard of yet. It's both intimidating and exhilarating. This connection between Elwyn, Goldshire, and Stormwind is why so many players associate their entire human leveling journey with the city. These 3 points form a triangle of early Alliance experience that shapes how players understand the game, the lore, and their place in Azeroth. The hub that connects all paths. As you grow more experienced, as you level up and explore more of the Eastern Kingdoms, you begin to realize something about Stormwind's position in the world. Alliance traveling classic often routes through this city, whether you intend it to or not. Stormwind links to the Griffin flight network that spans the continent. Want to fly to Ironforge? The Griffin Master is in the Trade District Tower. Need to get to Menethil Harbour to catch a boat? You'll probably fly through Stormwind first, heading south to the Dead Mines or Westfall. Stormwind is right there, moving east toward the Burning Steppes or Blackrock Mountain. The path runs through or near Stormwind. Even players who prefer Ironforge as their personal hub, who love the Dwarven city's more compact layout, or its proximity to certain high-level zones, end up using Stormwind as a frequent transit stop. The city is simply too well positioned, too well connected to avoid entirely. This reinforces Stormwind's role as a hub in a way that transcends mere game mechanics. It becomes the place you pass through, the place you stop at, the place you return to. Over and over again, your adventures begin or end in Stormwind, and with each return, the city becomes more familiar, more comfortable, more like home. We'll explore more of what makes this home so special as we move deeper into the city. For now, as we stand here at the threshold, gates open before us, music swelling around us, let's take a breath and appreciate this moment. You're about to enter Stormwind City, capital of the human kingdom, jewel of the Alliance, and for many of us, the closest thing to home we've ever found in a video game. Section 2, a city rebuilt, a throne empty. Now that we've passed through the gates and into the city proper, let's pause for a moment and consider something important about these walls around us, these streets beneath our feet, these magnificent buildings rising on all sides. What you're looking at isn't ancient. Stormwind, despite its grandeur, despite the weight of history it seems to carry, is actually a relatively young city. Or rather, it's a very old city that was completely destroyed and then painstakingly rebuilt. The Burning and the Rising. In the lore of classic World of Warcraft, Stormwind is presented as the last great human capital, standing after the devastation of the First and Second Wars. This wasn't always the case. There were once many human kingdoms, Lordaeron to the north, Stromgarde in the highlands, the proud naval power of Kultiras. But most of those kingdoms fell or fragmented during the wars with the Orcish Horde and the Scourge invasion. Stormwind itself was razed to the ground during the First War. When the Orcish Horde poured through the Dark Portal, they swept across the human lands with overwhelming force. The city burned. The kingdom fell. Survivors fled north to Lordaeron, carrying with them the young Prince Varian and the hopes of their people. But after the Second War, after the Alliance pushed back the Horde and secured victory, the survivors returned. They came back to ashes and rubble, to a lawnscape of broken stone and burned timber. And they decided to rebuild, not just to patch up what was damaged, but to rise again grander than before. To make a statement, humanity endures. This rebuilding effort would take years. It would require enormous resources, countless labourers, and the best craftsmen from across the Alliance. And at the centre of it all was a guild of master builders called the Stonemasons. The Stonemasons and their legacy. As you walk through Stormwind, look around at the architecture. The Cathedral of Light rising majestically in its district. The symmetric beauty of the trade district's layout. The imposing fortifications of Stormwind Keep. The white stone, the careful masonry, the sense that every brick was placed with intention and skill. All of this was created by the Stonemasons Guild, led by a man named Edwin Van Cleef. Van Cleef and his artisans were master builders, among the finest craftsmen in all of Azeroth. They took on the monumental task of rebuilding Stormwind from nothing, and they delivered. They created what you see around you now, a city that rivals anything the human kingdoms had ever produced, a capital worthy of being called the Jewel of the Alliance. The irony, the tragedy, is that those same magnificent white walls you passed through when you entered the city, they were built by men who would eventually be cast out beyond them, branded as criminals, forced to become the very thing they'd never intended to be. The story of the Defias Brotherhood is one of the darker tales woven into Stormwind's marble and stone. When the stonemasons finished their work, when they had spent years toiling to rebuild every street and structure, they asked for their payment. It was only fair. They had been promised compensation for this enormous undertaking. But the nobles of Stormwind refused to pay what is owed, and the reasons were complicated. Some say the kingdom's economy had been crippled by expanding military presence through Elwyn Forest and down into Stranglethorn. Others whisper of manipulation, of a dragon in human form, playing both sides against each other, ensuring that distrust and anger would fester. Regardless of the true cause, the result was the same. The stonemasons were left broke, forgotten by the city they had literally rebuilt with their own hands. Edwin Van Cleef spoke out. He demanded restitution. He organized his workers. And when words failed, when it became clear that the House of Nobles would not budge, the stonemasons took to the streets. They rioted in the newly rebuilt Stormwind, angry and betrayed. The riot was chaotic, dangerous. In the confusion, a thrown stone struck Queen Tiffin in the head as she tried to calm the crowd. She died instantly. The tragedy broke something in the city's soul and sealed the fate of the stonemasons. King Varian, grief-stricken and enraged, cracked down on the rioters with severity. The stonemasons fled the city, driven out by guards, branded as criminals despite having been the architects of the very walls that now hunted them. Van Cleef and his followers scattered to Westfall, hiding in the rural countryside. There, nursing their wounds and their anger, they transformed. No longer craftsmen and artisans, they became something else. The Defias Brotherhood, an organization of bandits and thieves who terrorized Westfall and nearby regions. If they wouldn't be paid fairly for honest work, they would take what they were owed by force. If you question Westfall and Classic, you'll encounter this storyline directly. You'll see the red bandanas of the Defias, fight their members in the streets of Sentinel Hill and in the mines around Moonbrook. Eventually you'll venture into the Dead Mines dungeon itself, deep into the old mining operations where Van Cleef has built something shocking, a massive warship, constructed underground, a tool of revenge against the kingdom that betrayed him. The weight of history in stone. So when you look at Stormwind's beautiful architecture, remember this. It was built by betrayed hands. The cathedral's soaring spires, the keep's imposing walls, the graceful arches of the trade district bridges, all of it crafted by men who were later treated as criminals. Some older corners of Stormwind and Classic still show subtle signs of this past. If you look carefully in certain districts, you can find cracked stone that seems too deliberate to be simple wear and tear. Rubble piles tucked into corners. Spaces that feel repurposed or unfinished, as if the reconstruction happened quickly in some areas and was never fully completed. These details, easy to overlook as you run past chasing quests or heading to the auction house, tell a story. They support the lore that Stormwind was rebuilt relatively recently and is still, in some ways, recovering from war and internal unrest. The city is only 30 years old in its current form, which is nothing in historical terms. It's a young capital wearing the clothes of an ancient one, trying to project stability while still processing trauma. This is part of what makes Stormwind's grandeur so poignant. It's not effortless. It's not ancient glory simply maintained. Its defiant glory, rebuilt glory, the insistence of a people who refuse to let darkness define them. Every stone declares, we fell and we rose, we were broken and we made ourselves beautiful again. A kingdom stretched thin, but Stormwind's troubles don't end with the Defias. In Classic era lore, the kingdom's authority extends far beyond the city walls. Theoretically, Stormwind holds dominion over Elwyn Forest, Westfall, Duskwood, Redridge Mountains, and has interests and outposts stretching as far as Stranglethorn Vale to the south. It's a lot of territory, and the problem is, Stormwind doesn't have the resources to effectively govern or defend all of it. Quest text throughout these zones repeatedly references this theme. The kingdom is stretched thin, politically distracted, unable to send the troops or supplies that frontier settlements desperately need. In Westfall, the Defias run rampant because Stormwind can't spare the military might to root them out properly. In Duskwood, the people face an ever-growing undead threat from Morladim and the Yorgan Dead, and their pleas for help go largely unanswered. Redridge has to deal with Gnoll and Orc incursions without adequate support. Over and over, the pattern repeats. Local problems fester because the capital is preoccupied elsewhere. This is the reality of Stormwind in Classic. Yes, it's a magnificent city. Yes, it projects power and stability. But it's also governing a realm in crisis, trying to hold together what remains of human civilization, while dealing with internal corruption, external threats, and the legacy of recent catastrophic wars. Classic-era lore positions Stormwind as the de facto leader of surviving human kingdoms. With Lordaeron fallen to the Scourge, with the Stromgarde a shadow of its former self, with Alterac long gone, Stormwind stands as the primary human power in the Alliance. This means enormous responsibility. The armies, the gold, the shipping lanes, all critical to keeping the Alliance functional, now depend heavily on Stormwind. If you pay attention to quest text and NPC dialogue, you'll pick up on references to refugees from other human lands. People from Lordaeron, survivors from Stromgarde, displaced populations fleeing undead-controlled territories in the north. They all come south, looking for safety, looking for hope. And many of them end up in or around Stormwind. These small references, buried in conversations with guards or mentioned in quest descriptions, underscore an important truth. Stormwind isn't just a capital, it's a sanctuary. It's taking in victims of larger conflicts across the Eastern Kingdoms. That's admirable. It's also exhausting for the kingdom's already strained resources. The empty throne. But perhaps the most significant challenge facing Stormwind in Classic isn't external at all. It's internal, it's political, and it sits right at the heart of the city. King Varian Rin is missing. This is one of the most interesting aspects of Stormwind's presentation in vanilla and Classic WoW. Players walking into the throne room might not immediately realize the significance, but the king is simply not there. Instead, the city is effectively run by Regent Lord Bolvar Fordrigan, a paladin of impeccable honor who serves as steward in the king's absence. Young Prince Anduin, barely more than a child, technically holds the title of king during this period. But he's advised by Bolvar and by Lady Katrana Prestor, a noble woman who has inserted herself into the power structure of Stormwind's government. This creates a complex political situation where the city has authority figures, but true sovereignty is unclear. Where is Varian? The official story is that he went missing while en route to a diplomatic summit at Theramore Isle. But there are whispers of conspiracy, hints of Defias involvement, suggestions that his disappearance wasn't accidental. A massive plot swirls beneath Stormwind's surface, one that players in Classic can engage with through the Onyxia attunement quest chain. Without spoiling too much for those who haven't experienced it, the answer involves dragons, manipulation, and a grand conspiracy that has been weakening Stormwind from within. The missing king is just one piece of a much larger scheme. This political vacuum adds tension to Stormwind's otherwise majestic atmosphere. Players are living in a capital with a broken throne, whether they realize it or not. The guards patrol, the merchants sell their wares, life continues, but at the core, there's an absence. Leadership is compromised, power is uncertain, and while Bolvar does his best to maintain order and defend the realm, he's a steward holding the place of a king, not the king himself. The keep that watches. Let's talk about Stormwind. Keep itself, that massive fortress complex that dominates the northwestern section of the city. If you make your way there, you'll find it's not just decorative. It's a real seat of government, a functioning command centre for the kingdom. The throne room in Stormwind Keep is designed with long sightlines, heavy banners bearing the Lion of Stormwind, ceremonial spacing that makes everyone who enters feel small before the power of the monarchy. The ceiling soars above you. The stone floor stretches out before the throne dais. Guards stand at attention along the walls. Everything about the room's architecture is intentional. This is where power sits, where judgment is rendered, where the fate of the kingdom is decided. Even without a king present, the throne room maintains that gravitas. You can imagine coronations there, great councils, moments of historical importance. It's built like a stage, because in many ways, that's what it is. A stage for the performance of sovereignty, for the theatre of kingship. Beyond the throne room itself, Stormwind Keep includes war rooms where military strategies are planned, guard barracks where the elite defenders of the city are housed, quest-related chambers where specific storylines play out. There are restricted spaces marked off by guards, doors you can't enter, areas that feel like they serve real governmental functions, rather than just being decorative set pieces. This layout does something clever. It makes Stormwind feel like a living capital rather than a mere player hub. Most MMO cities are essentially service menus with pretty backgrounds, but Stormwind Keep, with its guarded doors and functional chambers, suggests a working administration. There are parts of this building you're not meant to see. Business being conducted beyond your awareness. Governance happening whether you're logged in or not. That feeling matters. It contributes to immersion. It makes the world feel like it exists, independent of the player's presence. The military presence. As you move through Stormwind, you'll notice something that might not register consciously but contributes significantly to the city's atmosphere. There are guards everywhere. Not just static NPCs standing around, but patrolling soldiers, guards in formation, faction-related military personnel moving through the streets with purpose. Stormwind in Classic is filled with this background military presence. You see it in the Valley of Heroes, where guards stand watch at the gates. You see it in the Trade District, where patrols move through the crowds. You see it in the Keep, where elite guards protect entrances and important NPCs. You see it in the canals, where even the waterways have watchful eyes. This isn't accidental. It's world building through ambient design. The constant military undertone reminds players that the Alliance is at war, even when you're standing in the safe capital city. Defense is always active. Vigilance never rests. The guards themselves are formidable. Stormwind City guards in Classic are level 55 plus elite NPCs, which means they can quickly dispatch most low to mid-level horde raiders who wander too close to key areas. They have ranged abilities in some configurations, including nets that can stop mounted or fleeing attackers. They exist both as atmosphere and as actual gameplay mechanics for PvP deterrence. Their patrols create safe corridors through the city, and their sheer numbers make Stormwind feel genuinely defended, rather than just arbitrarily safe, because it's a starter city. This adds to the sense that you're in a real military powers headquarters, not just a theme park zone. If you listen carefully as you walk through different districts, you'll occasionally hear guards shout warnings. They react to nearby enemies, call out when they spot threats, warn players who enter restricted areas. These vocal reactions, though easily ignored once you're used to them, sell the fantasy that these guards are actually doing their jobs, not just standing around, waiting to be attacked. All of this contributes to Stormwind's identity as not just a trade hub or quest giver location, but as the seat of Alliance military power. This is where the war is directed from. This is where soldiers are trained, where strategy is planned, where the defense of humanity is organized. You might be here to check your mail or sell some loot at the auction house, but around you, the machinery of war never stops turning. That's Stormwind. That's what it means to be the capital of a kingdom fighting for survival. Section 3. The Architecture of Order. We've talked about Stormwind's history, its political tensions, its role as humanity's last great capital. Now let's talk about the city itself as a physical space, how it's organized, how it functions, how its design teaches you to navigate and understand it simply by moving through its streets. The guards who speak. Before we venture deeper into the districts, let's appreciate something you might not consciously notice. The guards of Stormwind are alive in ways that many game NPCs aren't. If you approach a restricted area, you'll hear them call out warnings. "Halt!" they might shout, or "You're not permitted here." These aren't just random barks. They're context-sensitive responses to player behavior, subtle audio cues that reinforce boundaries and danger zones within the city. When enemies appear nearby, whether it's a horde raider who's snuck into the trade district, or an ambitious low-level player who's accidentally flagged themselves for PvP, the guards react vocally. They coordinate. They call out to each other. The city's defense feels active rather than passive, with guards who seem to genuinely patrol and watch, rather than simply standing as decorative statues. This was innovative for its time. In many games, NPCs are silent until directly interacted with, but Stormwind's guards exist in a middle ground, where they observe, react, and communicate in ways that make them feel like actual sentinels. It's a small detail, but it contributes enormously to the sense that this is a defended city, not just a safe zone with guard models placed around for show. The guards' actual combat capabilities back this up. We mentioned briefly that Stormwind City guards are level 55 plus elites, but let's dig into what that means practically. A level 20 horde player wandering into Stormwind is going to be demolished almost instantly if they attract guard attention. Even high-level raiders need to be careful about which areas they attack and how quickly they move, because the guards can and will overwhelm unprepared invaders. Some guards have ranged net abilities that can snare and stop mounted players or those trying to flee. This turns guards from simple damage dealers into tactical obstacles. You can't just run through them. You have to plan around them, respect their coverage areas, understand their patrol paths. This creates emergent gameplay during Horde City raids. Players learn which entrances are less defended. They figure out timing windows between patrol rotations. They discover that certain corridors funnel guards into manageable numbers while others create impossible choke points. The guards aren't just atmosphere. They're active participants in how Stormwind functions as a PvP battleground, districts and divisions. Stormwind's layout in Classic is beautifully intentional. The city is divided into clear, walled districts with archways and choke points connecting them. This isn't just aesthetic, it's functional design that serves multiple purposes. First, it helps with navigation. Each district has a distinct identity. The trade district with its auction houses and fountain. The Cathedral district with its soaring spires. The Dwarven district with its industrial feel and griffin roosts. Old Town with its narrow streets and rogue-friendly shadows. The Mage Quarter with its towers and arcane atmosphere. The park with its nature-focused calm. Because these districts are physically separated by walls and connected through specific archways, you learn the city organically. You can't accidentally wander from the Cathedral to Old Town without passing through connecting spaces. The geography teaches you. After a few trips through Stormwind, you stop needing your mini-map, because the spatial relationships become intuitive. Second, this layout serves role-playing and social dynamics. Different districts attract different player types. Priests and paladins cluster around the cathedral for training and buffs. Warriors and weapon-oriented classes gravitate toward the Dwarven district and its martial associations. Rogues hide in Old Town. Mages study in their quarter. Each district becomes a mini-community within the larger city. Third, and this is clever level design, the district divisions create natural defensive positions. Those choke points we mentioned. They're perfect for guards to respond to threats. A horde raid can't simply flood into every part of the city simultaneously. They have to push through archways, navigate canals, deal with guard concentrations at specific points. The city's layout makes it defensible even though it's technically a safe zone where PvP rules are bent. The canals add another layer to this. Running roughly through the centre of the city, they create an inner ring that lets players shortcut between districts if they're willing to jump down and swim. This teaches vertical thinking, encourages exploration, and rewards players who learn the three-dimensional space of Stormwind rather than just following roads. It's environmental storytelling through level design. The city feels like it was built by people who understood defense, trade flow, and civic organization. It feels real. Visual cues of rebuilding. We've talked about how Stormwind was rebuilt after the First War, but let's look more closely at what that means visually. The city's bright stonework and symmetrical design hide a lot of storytelling. If you pay attention, you'll notice that Stormwind's architecture is almost too perfect in some places. The white stone is clean, the lines are straight, the buildings are orderly. This isn't the weathered, organic growth of a city that evolved over centuries. This is intentional reconstruction. It's a city that was designed and built as a unified project, which is exactly what happened in the lore. But then you'll spot the cracks. Literally. Certain walls have damage that seems deliberate, not just texture work. Corners where rubble has been piled but not fully cleared. Spaces that feel repurposed or hastily finished. These are the visual cues that support the story. Stormwind is only 30 years old in its current form, and in some areas, that reconstruction happened under pressure with limited resources. The contrast between the pristine, grand areas, like the Cathedral and the Keep, versus the more lived-in, sometimes rough-edged areas in Old Town, and parts of the Dwarven District, tells you something about priorities. The visible, important buildings got finished first and maintained immaculately. The background infrastructure, the places regular citizens live and work, shows more wear. This creates a city that feels layered. It has the grandeur it wants to project, but it also has the reality underneath, a kingdom that was broken and is still, in many ways, in recovery. The Cathedral, Stormwind's crown. Now let's turn our attention to what is perhaps the most iconic structure in all of Stormwind, the Cathedral of Light. This building dominates the Cathedral district, and honestly, it dominates much of the city's skyline. It's massive. When you first see it, whether you're approaching from the trade district or entering Stormwind from the main gates and catching glimpses through the buildings, the Cathedral makes an impression. This is one of the largest buildings in the entire vanilla game world, not just in Stormwind, in all of Classic WoW. Its size and architectural ambition make it immediately recognizable, and its placement makes it feel like the spiritual heart of the city. The Cathedral's design draws heavily from Gothic church architecture, with soaring vertical lines, pointed arches, and a sense of reaching toward the heavens. This fits perfectly with its role as the center of the Church of the Holy Light. Pilgrims, priests, and paladins come here from across Azeroth to train, to pray, to seek wisdom from the holy leaders who reside within. Inside, the cathedral is even more impressive. High vaulted ceilings, stone columns that seem to stretch forever upward, stained glass windows that filter coloured light across the floors, rows of pews, an altar at the front. Everything about the interior reinforces the sense of sacred space, of somewhere set apart from the ordinary world, outside. If you explore thoroughly, you'll find that the cathedral has a basement, accessible by stairs on the right side toward the back of the building. Down there are the catacombs, a library, general tomb areas. It's quieter down there, removed from the main floor's constant traffic of players getting buffs and turning in quests. The catacombs have their own atmosphere, more somber, more contemplative. Interestingly, because the catacombs are less trafficked and have no guards patrolling, they became a notorious spot in Classic for horde raids. A warlock and a couple of rogues could sneak down there, and suddenly you have a summoning point deep inside Alliance territory. The entire raid appears in the cathedral basement, ready to storm upward and take the city by surprise. It's a tactical vulnerability that adds emergent gameplay to Stormwind's design. But under normal circumstances, the Cathedral District is peaceful. It's one of the city's most recognized landmarks for Alliance players. The massive structure, visible from so many angles, serves as a waypoint. Meet at the Cathedral is an instruction that requires no further clarification. Everyone knows exactly where you mean. The Cathedral's size reinforces Stormwind's role as a spiritual centre for humanity. This isn't just a political capital, it's a religious one. The Church of the Holy Light operates from here, and the building's grandeur declares that the faith is strong, the congregation is vast, the light still burns bright, even after all the darkness the world has endured. Hidden artistry and Easter eggs. Cathedral Square itself, the plaza surrounding the cathedral, has its own subtle details worth noting. If you take the time to examine things closely, you'll find that the stained glass windows and murals scattered around the district contain subtle nods to real-world art and Warcraft book covers. These artistic Easter eggs reward players who examine holy sites beyond just grabbing priest buffs and running off. Someone at Blizzard put thought into these details, creating a sense that the cathedral isn't just a gameplay space, but a place with cultural and artistic significance within the world. Every night at sunset in Stormwind, the cathedral rings a bell. It's a single, clear tone that reaches across the entire city. This bell was forged in Ironforger's Great Forge, a gift from the dwarves to symbolize the friendship between their peoples. There was originally a twin bell created for Lordaeron, but with that kingdom's fall, Stormwind's bell now rings alone. Some NPCs in the lore mention that the bell's sound, once a joyful reminder of Alliance unity, has become tinged with sadness. It rings out each evening as a memorial, as much as a call to prayer, acknowledging what has been lost even as the city continues. The mystery of locked doors. As you explore Stormwind more thoroughly, you will start to notice something curious. There are numerous decorative gates and doors throughout the city that cannot be entered. They look functional. They have handles, frames, architectural detail suggesting they should lead somewhere. But they're locked, or more accurately, they're not actually doors at all, despite appearances. This became a minor urban legend topic among early Classic players. What's behind that door? Is there a hidden area we haven't discovered? Was this content planned and cut from the game? Most of these doors are simply level design tricks, ways to create visual interest and realism, without having to build out every interior space. But their presence feeds into the fantasy that Stormwind is bigger than what we see, that there are rooms and buildings we don't have access to, that the city exists beyond the playable areas. A few of these false doors do correspond to instances or areas that were planned and never finished, particularly in early development. Stormwind, like many Classic zones, was built somewhat hastily as Blizzard rushed to launch World of Warcraft. Not every planned feature made it in, and these locked doors sometimes represent those abandoned ideas. But functionally, they serve a purpose. They make Stormwind feel like a real city with private spaces, restricted areas, homes, and businesses that exist for citizens rather than adventurers. You're not meant to access every building. That would be strange. Cities don't work that way. The locked doors are realism through limitation. The harbour that wasn't. Here's something that veteran players returning to Classic, or new players familiar with later expansions, might find jarring. Stormwind in Classic doesn't have a full harbour district. In Wrath of the Lich King and beyond, Stormwind gains an entire harbour zone with boats to Northrend and eventually other destinations. But in Vanilla and Classic, that infrastructure doesn't exist yet. Alliance ocean travel on this continent centres instead on Menethil Harbour to the north, and boats from Theramore Isle to the south. The lack of a Stormwind harbour gives Classic-era Stormwind a more landlocked feel. The main exterior access is visually and functionally focused on the southern gate, the Valley of Heroes Bridge, and the road to Elwyn Forest. You arrive by land, you leave by land or by Griffin flight or by the Deeprun tram to Ironforge. This geographical reality shapes how players interact with the city. Stormwind feels more like a mountain capital backed against the peaks to the north, opening southward toward Elwyn rather than a coastal trading power. It makes sense lore-wise that the harbour would be expanded later as the kingdom rebuilt its naval capabilities. But in Classic, you're experiencing Stormwind before that maritime infrastructure was fully developed. For players who never saw Stormwind without its harbour, Classic offers a glimpse of what the city used to be. It's smaller in some ways, more contained, but also more focused. Everything important happens within the walls, not spread out across harbour docks and shipping infrastructure. The development history you can feel. Stormwind, along with Elwyn Forest and Westfall, was among the first zones created during World of Warcraft's development. This early construction is visible in how polished and intuitive the city feels. The developers spent more time with Stormwind than almost any other capital city, refining its layout, testing its flow, making sure navigation worked. The result is a city that, despite its size, is relatively easy to navigate. The districts make sense. The roads flow logically. You're never confused about which direction you should be heading, because the architecture guides you naturally. This contrasts with some later developed areas in Classic that can feel more confusing or less elegant in their design. Stormwind benefited from being one of the first major projects, one the team kept iterating on until it felt right. There were technical considerations too. On lower-end machines that were common when Classic WoW launched, turning quickly between districts, say from the canals into the Dwarven district, often caused brief stutters or texture pop-in. Each district had its own asset set, its own architectural style, and forcing the engine to load new textures mid-turn created momentary performance hiccups. This technical limitation unintentionally emphasized the feeling that each district was its own neighborhood with distinct character. The performance stutter became an unconscious signal to players. You're entering a new area now. Pay attention. It's an example of how technical constraints can accidentally reinforce design intentions. As technology improved and the game was optimized, these stutters mostly disappeared. But players who experience Classic on period-appropriate hardware remember them, and for some, those little performance quirks are part of the nostalgic memory of what early WoW felt like. Section 4. Districts as Characters. We've explored Stormwind's layout, its defences, its grand architecture. Now let's get more intimate with the city. Let's talk about how each district develops its own personality, not just through visual design, but through sound, through the NPCs you find there, through the services they offer. Stormwind doesn't just look different from a district to district. It feels different, it sounds different, and that layering of sensory detail is what turns a video game city into a place that feels alive. The soundscape shifts. While Stormwind shares an overall orchestral city theme, something subtle happens as you move between districts. The ambient sounds change. Stand near the canals and you'll hear water lapping against stone, the occasional splash as someone jumps in, or a fish breaks the surface. If you're close to the edges of the city, you might catch the distant calls of gulls. Move into Cathedral Square and the acoustics shift. There's more echo here, voices bouncing off the massive stone walls of the cathedral. Bells ring from the towers, marking the hours. The sounds of the crowd take on a different quality, more reverent somehow, as if people naturally lower their voices in proximity to such a holy sight. Venture into Old Town, and the ambience darkens slightly. The streets are narrower, so sounds don't carry as far. Footsteps echo more sharply. Conversations seem more hushed, more secretive. It's subtle, but it reinforces the district's identity as Stormwind's seedier quarter. These layered audio cues help players navigate and emotionally distinguish each area, even without looking at the minimap. After you've spent enough time in Stormwind, you can tell where you are just by listening. The fountain splash of the trade district, the echoing grandeur of Cathedral Square, the industrial clang from the Dwarven district, the quieter, more scholarly atmosphere of the Mage Quarter. This kind of environmental audio design was fairly advanced for 2004. Many games treated city ambience as a single track that played everywhere. But Stormwind sound designers understood that a real city has acoustic variety, that different neighborhoods have different sonic signatures. By implementing this, they made Stormwind feel more like a place you inhabit, rather than a space you simply pass through. The bureaucratic soul. Here's a detail that's easy to overlook. Stormwind Keep and nearby areas contain libraries, archives, and book-filled rooms that imply a bureaucratic state with records and history. Walk through certain chambers in the keep, and you'll see bookshelves lining the walls, scrolls on tables. The visual language of record-keeping and governance. These spaces are easy to ignore as mere decoration. Most players run past them chasing quest markers. But they add realism by suggesting governance beyond quest NPCs. Stormwind isn't just a military headquarters, it's an administration. There are clerks and scribes, historians and accountants, people managing the mundane but essential work of running a kingdom. The presence of these libraries and archives tells you that Stormwind values knowledge, history, documentation. This is a literate society with institutional memory. When decisions are made in the throne room, there are records of past precedents to consult. When treaties are signed, they're written down and stored. The city doesn't just react to the present, it remembers the past and plans for the future. It's world building through environmental props, and it works because it doesn't announce itself. You have to look to notice it, and when you do notice it, the city gains depth. Stormwind becomes less of a stage set, and more of a functioning capital with real infrastructure. The Arcane Heart, the Mage Quarter, sits in the southern corner of Stormwind and has a distinct identity that sets it apart from every other district. This is where Alliance mages train, where magical services concentrate, where the arcane arts are studied and mastered. Visually, the Mage Quarter is recognizable by its tower, its magical motifs worked into the architecture, the subtle blue and purple colour palette that suggests mystical energy. It feels like Stormwind's mystic engine room, the place where the kingdom's magical power is generated and controlled. The Wizard's Sanctum is the centerpiece of this district, a building dedicated to magical study and training. Inside, you'll find mage trainers who can teach you new spells and abilities as you level up. But the Sanctum is more than just a gameplay service location. It's designed to feel like a real magical institution, with books and arcane implements, with NPCs who discuss magical theory, with an atmosphere that suggests serious scholarly work happening beyond what you see. The Mage Quarter also hints at Kirin Tor influence in the background. The Kirin Tor, the Council of Wizards based in Dalaran, has long had connections to Stormwind's magical community. While the Kirin Tor itself is far to the north, and during Classic, Dalaran is protected by an impenetrable dome, the echoes of that magical tradition still resonate in Stormwind's Mage Quarter. You can hear it in the ambient NPC chatter, mages discussing spell theory, debating the merits of different magical approaches, mentioning names like Antonidas and other famous arcanists. It creates the sense that the Mage Quarter isn't isolated. It's connected to a broader magical tradition that spans the Alliance and beyond. There's even a small portal prop in the Mage Quarter that references content from much later expansions. It's a nod from the developers, an Easter egg for players who know the lore, suggesting that even in Classic, Blizzard was thinking about where the story might go. These little details reward close attention and make exploring the city feel like treasure hunting for lore fragments. The Hidden Coven. Now let's talk about one of Stormwind's most atmospheric locations, the Slaughtered Lamb Tavern. The Slaughtered Lamb sits in the Mage Quarter, but it couldn't be more different from the Wizard's Sanctum. This is a seedy pub, dark and unwelcoming. When you walk in, the first thing you notice is how empty it is. There's a bartender, Jarrell Moore, and not much else. No patrons drinking, no crowds, just shadows and an uncomfortable silence. Jarrell will advise you to stay away from the shadows if you interact with them. It's a warning, but it's also a hint, because if you look closely, you'll find stairs leading down. The entrance is intentionally obscure, blending into the shadowy interior in a way that makes it easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Down those stairs, you'll find the true purpose of the Slaughtered Lamb. The basement and catacombs below serve as Stormwind's warlock training grounds. This is where Alliance warlocks study the dark arts, practice demon summoning, and learn to master field magic. The lore around this place is rich. Warlocks are not officially welcomed in Stormwind. The Church of the Holy Light considers their magic corrupting and dangerous. Regular citizens fear them. Guards, when asked, will claim they don't know of any warlock trainers in the city, though they might mention sightings of demonic activity near the Slaughtered Lamb, and suggest you check there if you're truly curious. The reality is that Stormwind's authorities pretend the Warlock Coven doesn't exist. It's an open secret. The Warlocks are tolerated because their knowledge can be useful, particularly when dealing with demonic threats. But they're kept hidden, tucked away in a basement beneath an empty tavern, practicing their magic, where polite society doesn't have to acknowledge them. This creates wonderful atmosphere for warlock players. Training your class doesn't happen in a grand hall like it does for priests or paladins. It happens in a secret basement that you have to sneak into, surrounded by other practitioners of forbidden magic. The entire experience reinforces the class fantasy. You're powerful, but you're also dangerous, and society views you with suspicion. The Slaughtered Lamb is presumably named after the famous pub from the film An American Werewolf in London. a horror movie reference that fits perfectly with the location's dark, occult atmosphere. It's the kind of small touch that shows how much thought went into Stormwind's design. Even the name of a minor tavern carries thematic weight. Below the warlock training area, there's even another section in catacombs, with empty, open coffins scattered across the floor. It's eerie, it's unnecessary for gameplay purposes, but it adds to the unsettling feeling of the place, the sense that you're venturing into spaces beneath the city that were perhaps better left unexplored. The portal room mystery. Speaking of hidden spaces, let's talk about Stormwind's portal room. In later versions of WoW, the Mage Quarter contains a clearly marked portal room where mages can open portals to other Alliance cities. Players are familiar with entering through a door in the Wizard's Sanctum Tower and stepping into this chamber. But here's something most players never realize. The functional portal room in Stormwind is actually placed in a hidden area below the visible city. The door you see in the tower leads to this off-map space that exists technically beneath Stormwind, but isn't part of the normal city geography. This is a level design trick that Blizzard used to manage transitions and keep file sizes manageable. Rather than building the portal room as an actual interior within the city's mesh, they created it as a separate space that players get teleported to when they use the door. Here's where it gets interesting. If you're exploring Stormwind through glitches, or by falling through certain holes beneath the city, you can actually land directly in that portal room location, instead of disconnecting. Falling through the right spot beneath the Mage Tower drops you into the real position of the portal room, revealing how the interior is tucked away in Stormwind's understructure. This kind of hidden geography fascinates the exploration community. It's a peek behind the curtain, a glimpse at how the game world is actually constructed versus how it appears to normal players. And it reinforces something important. Stormwind, for all its feeling of solidity and reality, is ultimately a carefully constructed illusion. The magic of good level design is making that construction invisible. The learning geography. Stormwind and Classic contains trainers for many Alliance classes, but they're intentionally scattered by district. Priests and paladins train in Cathedral Square near the Cathedral of Light. Warriors and weapon specialists gravitate toward the Dwarven district. Rogues train in Old Town. Mages train in the Mage Quarter. Warlocks train beneath the Slaughtered Lamb. Hunters work with their trainers in areas that have stable masters nearby. This distribution isn't random, it's a tutorial system disguised as world design. By forcing players to find their trainer based on class identity, Stormwind teaches you the city's layout through necessity. You can't avoid learning where the Cathedral district is if you're a priest who needs to train new spells every few levels. You can't stay ignorant of Old Town's location if you're a rogue returning for new abilities. This design turns the city into a kind of navigation tutorial. By the time you've leveled from 10 to 20 in and around Stormwind, visiting your trainer regularly, you've naturally learned how the districts connect. You know which archways lead where. You've developed mental shortcuts. The geography has become intuitive. It's elegant because it never feels like a tutorial. You're not following arrows or completing a quest called Learn the City Layout. You're just trying to train your abilities, and in doing so, you absorb Stormwind's geography organically. This is environmental teaching at its finest. The working economy. Stormwind's profession trainers follow a similar distribution philosophy. They're spread across districts in ways that create a sense of a working economy rather than a static hub. The trade district contains many general merchants and some profession trainers, but specialized craftspeople tend to cluster in districts that match their trade's identity. Blacksmithing, with its forges and anvils, belongs to the Dwarven district's industrial atmosphere. Tailoring and enchanting more refined crafts can be found near the canals in the trade district. Alchemy and herbalism, dealing with natural ingredients, have their own corners. Cooking trainers aren't concentrated in one grand culinary school. They're scattered in places that make sense, near inns, near markets, places where food would naturally be prepared and sold. Fishing trainers set up near water, the canals naturally, since that's where you'd actually fish in the city. This layout encourages players to run through different neighbourhoods, reinforcing familiarity and social interaction along the way. You're not just visiting a single profession quarter and staying there. You're moving through the city, passing other players, seeing different districts, building a mental map through repeated traversal. It also makes Stormwind feel like a real city with a functioning economy. Blacksmiths work near forges because that's where the equipment is. Tailors work near fabric merchants because that's efficient. The profession trainers aren't just NPCs providing a service, they're embedded in a world that makes logical sense. The Dwarven Alliance. The Dwarven district deserves special attention because it represents something important about Stormwind and the Alliance as a whole. This is not a purely human city. Despite Stormwind being the human capital, the Dwarven district gives substantial space to Dwarven culture and industry. The engineering trainers set up here with their gnomish and Dwarven mechanical expertise. The Griffin Roost is here, with Griffin masters who facilitate flight travel. There are blacksmithing facilities, forges, and a general workshop-like atmosphere. This district highlights the political and cultural alliance between Stormwind and Ironforge, showing that the city is not purely human despite appearances. The dwarves have their own presence here, their own architectural touches, their own NPCs and services. It's a constant visual reminder that the Alliance is multiracial, a coalition of peoples, rather than a single nation. The Griffin Master in the Dwarven District's flight tower is one of the earliest Alliance flight points that new human characters use. This placement isn't accidental. By putting flight services in the Dwarven District, the game subtly teaches new players that Dwarven and human interests are intertwined. You want to travel? You need the Griffins, and the Griffins come from Dwarven culture. The district's more industrial feel contrasts nicely with the grand Gothic aesthetic of human-centric areas like the Cathedral district or the Keep. It gives Stormwind texture, variety, a sense that different cultures coexist here and contribute their own flavors to the city's character. Stand in the center of the Dwarven district and you can see the blending of architectural styles. Human stone construction meets Dwarven practicality. Blue and gold Alliance banners hang alongside more rustic Dwarven decorations. It's a visual representation of Alliance in the literal sense. Distinct peoples working together while maintaining their own identities. As we continue our tour through Stormwind, keep noticing these details. The way sound changes between districts. The way NPCs are placed to tell stories through their locations. the way services are distributed to teach you the city's geography. Stormwind is full of these small, thoughtful touches that add up to something remarkable. A video game city that actually feels like a place where people live and work and build a civilization together. Section 5. The Economic Heart. Now let's turn our attention to the beating heart of Stormwind's daily life, the Trade District. This is where commerce happens, where players gather in greatest numbers, where the city's economic engine hums with constant activity. If the Cathedral is Stormwind's spiritual centre and the Keep is its political core, the Trade District is its commercial soul. Wings over Stormwind. Before we dive into the markets and banks, let's talk about how most Alliance players arrive at and depart from Stormwind. The Griffin Flight Network. The Griffin Master in the Trade District's flight tower is positioned strategically up a ramp on the east side of the district. This placement makes it one of the first services new human characters interact with after outgrowing Goldshire. You've walked from Elwyn Forest, you've passed through the Valley of Heroes, you've entered the Trade District, and there, visible and accessible, is your introduction to Azeroth's fast travel system. Griffins are magnificent creatures, massive winged beasts with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle. They've been the Alliance's preferred aerial mount for travel between fixed points, and their roosts dot the Eastern Kingdom's landscape. In Classic WoW, before you have the personal mount at level 40, before you can fly on your own, in later expansions, Griffins represent freedom from walking. The flight network links Stormwind to Ironforge, to Menethil Harbour, to various quest hubs throughout Alliance territories. Every significant location has a flight master, and once you've discovered a flight point by speaking to its Griffin Master, you can fly there from any other discovered point. It's a system that rewards exploration, encouraging players to venture out and touch each hub so they'll have access later. But more than mechanics, the Griffin network reinforces Stormwind's role as the Central Alliance transportation hub on the Eastern Kingdom side. Even high-level players, routing to distant locations, often fly through Stormwind simply because it's the most connected node in the network. The city sits at the center of Alliance travel, quite literally as a hub in the flight path web. This positioning isn't accidental. By making Stormwind the most convenient transit point, the game ensures constant traffic through the city. Players coming and going, adventurers stopping briefly between destinations. That constant flow of travellers gives Stormwind its energy, its sense of being a living crossroads rather than a static location. The marketplace of Azeroth, Stormwind's trade district, contains not one, not two, but 3 auction houses, or at least that's how it appears in Classic. The trio of auction houses makes Stormwind one of the primary economic centres for Alliance players. Now in terms of actual functionality, all Alliance auction houses are linked. An item sold in Stormwind can be bought in Ironforge or Darnassus. The data is shared across all Alliance capitals, but psychologically, physically, Stormwind feels like the trade capital because of how central and accessible its auction houses are. Players often debated which city was the true trade capital. Ironforge had its advocates, particularly because its compact layout made bank-to-auction house travel faster. But Stormwind's quest routing and central positioning ensured it stayed busy throughout the Classic level range. New players naturally gravitated here, and where new players went, so did the traders looking to sell them gear and materials. The auction house system revolutionized MMO economies. Instead of standing in one spot spamming WTS item in trade chat, players could list items for sale, set prices, and let the market work while they went adventuring. Buyers could search for exactly what they needed, compare prices, make informed decisions. This turned Stormwind's trade district into more than a marketplace. It became a learning environment for understanding supply and demand, for watching prices fluctuate based on demand, for figuring out which materials were valuable because raiders needed them for consumables, which items sold well because they were leveling gear for specific brackets. The auction house was where players learned that copper ore sold well at certain times when engineers were power leveling their profession, where you discovered that rare recipes could fetch substantial gold, where you realized that patience could earn you money by buying low on long auctions and reselling higher during prime time. It was an education in virtual economics, and Stormwind's trade district was the classroom. The clustering effect. Here's something that might seem like a minor detail, but had major implications. Mailboxes in Stormwind are clustered very close to banks and auction houses in the trade district. Think about the workflow this creates. You arrive in Stormwind with bags full of loot from questing or dungeon runs. You go to the bank to deposit items you want to keep. Then you step a few feet to the auction house to list items for sale. Then you walk just a bit further to the mailbox to collect sold items from previous auctions, or to send materials to an alt character. Bank, auction house, mailbox, all within a tight cluster. This geographic concentration taught players MMO economy loops simply through spatial design. You didn't need a tutorial explaining how these systems work together. You learned by watching traffic patterns, by seeing where other players moved, by copying what seemed efficient. But this clustering had an unintended consequence that became infamous in Classic's early days: performance issues. On crowded servers, particularly during peak hours, the area around the trade district mailboxes and auction houses could become a lagfest. Hundreds of players crammed into a small space, all loading each other's character models, all rendering armor and weapons and guild to bards. The game struggled to handle it. Players learned to step away from the crowd just to retrieve mail without suffering slideshow frame rates. The mailbox lag became a running joke in the community, a shared experience that bonded players through mutual technical suffering. Anyone else lagging by the mailbox? Was a common trade chat message, answered by a chorus of complaints and commiseration. Blizzard would eventually address these performance issues through various optimizations, but in Classic's early days, and in vanilla before it, the mailbox cluster lag was just part of life in Stormwind. It was where the people were, so that's where you went, even if it meant your frame rate dropped to unplayable levels for a few seconds. Interestingly, this technical problem reinforced a social behavior. People hung out there. Even when not actively using the services, players would linger near the bank and auction house because that's where everyone else was. It became a de facto social hub within the already social trade district. The fountain's gravity. Speaking of social hubs, let's talk about the trade district fountain. This central feature, with its statue and perpetually flowing water, became an unofficial gathering point where emergent player behavior created culture. The fountain wasn't designed with this purpose. There's no quest NPC standing there. No services provided at the fountain itself. It's just a decorative element, a piece of urban planning meant to break up the square and add visual interest. But players made it into something more. Guilds recruited at the fountain, their members standing on its edges to gain height and visibility, while spamming recruitment messages in trade chat. Duelists fought nearby, showing off gear or testing new builds, with spectators gathered around to watch. Players would idle there, waiting for dungeon groups to form or for friends to log in. Mounted players would circle the fountain, showing off rare mounts or simply filling time. This evolved organically. No system told players to gather here. But the fountain's central position in the trade district, combined with its open space and landmark quality, made it a natural meeting point. Meet at the fountain required no additional context. Everyone knew exactly which fountain you meant. Similar phenomena happened in other MMOs and other games, where players would choose specific spots as their unofficial hangout. But Stormwind's fountain is particularly memorable for classic players because it represents how player culture can override intended design. Blizzard built a trade district with services. Players turned part of it into a town square. The fountain also became a stage for showing off achievements. Got a rare mount. Ride it around the fountain so everyone sees. Earned a prestigious title. Stand by the fountain where the most players will notice. Acquired epic gear that makes you look impressive. The fountain is where you make your fashion statement. It was performative, but that performance was part of the social fabric. The fountain gave players a stage, and they used it. The bank's hidden details. Let's talk about Stormwind Bank for a moment, because even this utilitarian service building has storytelling details, if you look closely. The bank's back rooms contain ledger props and vault stacks, suggesting deeper financial bureaucracy. You can glimpse these through doorways and windows. These spaces you can't enter, but that exist visually to suggest the bank is more than just the teller windows you interact with. Behind those scenes, there are clerks managing accounts, guards watching vaults, accountants tracking the flow of gold through Stormwind's economy. Or at least, that's what the environmental storytelling suggests. In gameplay terms, these are decorative props. But in world-building terms, they turn the bank from a game menu into an institution. Even more interesting are the wanted posters visible behind bank tellers. If you take the time to read them, you'll find they list fictional robbers alongside transaction ledgers. These details add gritty realism to the finance hub, implying that even the safest vault in Azeroth faces ongoing crime threats. Who are these wanted criminals? Are they real threats or just flavor text? The game never tells you, and that ambiguity works in the world's favor. It suggests a wider world with stories happening beyond your view. Crimes being investigated, threats being monitored, a city dealing with problems that don't require player intervention. The wanted posters also ties subtly into Old Town's rogue and intelligence themes. Stormwind has a criminal element. The bank acknowledges this. SI7 probably investigates these cases. It's all connected through small environmental details that create a sense of a functioning city-state. The cue that taught. In Classic's early days, before players fully understood the bank interface, bank lines formed naturally from new player confusion over how the storage tabs worked. Experienced players, seeing newcomers struggling to figure out how to access the bank slots, would shout tips like, "Use the right side vault," or explain the tab system. This created informal player tutorials right at the bank's doorstep. Veterans mentoring newcomers, not because any game system rewarded it, but because helping made everything move faster and because most players remembered being confused themselves once. This mentorship vibe was unique to high-traffic capitals like Stormwind. In smaller towns or less-used cities, you were on your own to figure things out. But in Stormwind, the density of players meant help was usually available if you needed it. The bank queue psychology also revealed something about how players learn MMO systems. They learn by imitation and observation, before reading tooltips or seeking external guides. Watch what other players do. Copy their behavior. Gradually understand the logic through repetition. The bank, like the auction house and mailbox clustering, taught through spatial design and social modeling. Stormwind as tutorial. In a very real sense, Stormwind and Classic teaches MMO systems through the placement and proximity of its services. New players arrive from Elwynn Forest, understanding basic combat and questing. Stormwind introduces them to banks, auction houses, mail systems, flight paths, profession trainers, and class abilities through necessity and exploration. You need to train new abilities, so you find your class trainer. While looking, you pass the bank and realize you can store items. You notice other players running to the auction house and discover you can sell excess loot. Someone sends you an in-game mail, and you find the mailbox. Each system is introduced organically, situated in physical space rather than explained through tutorial pop-ups. This philosophy of teaching through environment, rather than explicit instruction, makes learning feel natural. You're not sitting through a tutorial. You're exploring a city and discovering useful services. The distinction matters psychologically. It makes players feel clever for figuring things out rather than infantilized by hand-holding. Modern MMOs often front-load tutorials, overwhelming new players with information windows and guided tours. Classic Stormwind says, here's a city, go explore it, you'll figure it out. And remarkably, most players did. Old Town's shadow. As we leave the bright, bustling trade district and venture southwest, we cross into Old Town, and the atmosphere changes immediately. Old Town houses the rogue trainers and carries a Thieves' Guild atmosphere, with shady alleys, hidden corners, and crime-related NPCs. Even the architecture feels different here. The buildings lean in closer. The streets narrow. The lighting seems dimmer, though that might just be psychological, a response to Old Town's reputation and what it represents. This is Stormwind's rough quarter, the district that never fully escaped its roots. While the Trade District and Cathedral Square project, wealth and piety, Old Town wears its roughness openly. The people here are different, the services cater to different needs. A rogue coming to learn new abilities fits naturally in Old Town in a way they wouldn't in Cathedral Square. The district also houses SI7, Stormwind's intelligence service. Their headquarters sits relatively modestly in Old Town, marked mainly by signage and a functional building rather than a huge fortress. This low-profile design matches the organization's espionage theme perfectly. SI7 is Stormwind's answer to covert operations. They handle spy work, assassination, intelligence gathering, the dirty necessities of statecraft that don't happen in the throne room. Having them based in Old Town, among the rogues and shadier elements, makes perfect sense thematically. They're part of the kingdom, but apart from its public face. The visual understatement of SI7's presence reinforces this. You could walk past the building without realizing it houses one of the Alliance's most important organizations. That's intentional. Real intelligence services don't advertise. They operate quietly, embedded in urban fabric, watching without being watched. This makes Stormwind feel like it has layers. There's the public city, the cathedral, the keep, the trade district, all bright and impressive. And then there's the Shadow City, Old Town, SI7, the Slaughtered Lambs Warlock Coven, the places where necessary but uncomfortable work happens away from polite view. Old Town is where you go when you need to learn to pickpocket, when you need to find an assassin contact for a quest, when the story takes a darker turn and requires abilities that don't belong in Cathedral Square. It's Stormwind acknowledging that even a beautiful capital has shadows, and those shadows serve important functions in keeping the kingdom safe. Section 6. Shadows and Stone. We've entered Old Town now, leaving the bright commerce of the trade district behind. The atmosphere here is different, more subdued, with an undercurrent of danger and secrecy. This is where Stormwind keeps its shadows, its spies, its soldiers, its criminals, and its dungeons. Let's explore what makes Old Town one of the most thematically rich districts in the entire city. Intelligence in plain sight. SI7's headquarters sits relatively modestly in Old Town, marked mainly by signage and a functional building rather than a huge fortress. This visual understatement is perfect for what SI7 represents. Stormwind's intelligence service, operating in the open while maintaining operational secrecy. SI7, which stands for Stormwind Intelligence, is the Alliance's premier covert operations organization. They handle espionage, assassination, intelligence gathering, and the kinds of missions that can't happen through official military channels. In a world where dragons can disguise themselves as nobles, and corruption can hollow out a kingdom from within, organizations like SY7 aren't optional. They're necessary for survival. What's clever about SI7's presentation in Classic is that they don't announce themselves with grand architecture or obvious military presence. Their building looks functional, professional, but not particularly impressive from the outside. You could walk past it without realizing you're looking at the headquarters of one of the Alliance's most important organizations. Inside, though, if you pay attention, you'll find environmental details that tell a different story. Maps on walls showing various regions of Azeroth. Dossiers and intelligence reports scattered on tables. Spy gear and equipment suggesting constant operations. The props and NPCs create the impression of an active intelligence agency conducting surveillance and coordinating missions throughout the Eastern Kingdoms and beyond. This low-profile approach makes Stormwind feel like it has layers of governance. The keep is where public power sits, where the throne commands armies and makes laws. SI7 is where secret power operates, where threats are neutralized before they become public, where information is gathered and leveraged for strategic advantage. Real cities have both kinds of power. Stormwind shows you both. The fact that SI7 operates openly but quietly in Old Town, among the rogues and shadier elements of Stormwind society, makes perfect thematic sense. They're embedded in the fabric of the city, watching everything, part of Stormwind but distinct from its public face. It's good spycraft and good world building simultaneously. The Hall of Warriors, Down the street, for SY7, still in Old Town's southern section, sits Champions Hall, the officers' barracks and PvP reward centre for the Alliance. This building serves multiple purposes, both mechanical and thematic, and it's worth understanding what it represents. In Classic WoW's original honour system, Champions Hall was initially accessible only to players who had achieved the rank of Knight, rank 6, or higher through PvP combat. It was gated content, a reward for dedication to player versus player warfare. Inside, vendors sold PvP gear, weapons, and eventually mounts to high-ranking Alliance warriors. The hall itself is designed like a military command centre. In the back, Alliance generals stand around a table, studying maps of Azeroth. Archmage Gaiman from Stormwind, Sergeant Major Sky Shadow from Darnassus, Harbinger Inarth from the Exodar. These NPCs suggest ongoing strategic planning, war councils happening beyond player view, commanders coordinating Alliance military efforts across continents. But here's what makes Champions Hall particularly interesting from a lore perspective. Many of the human NPCs inside are named after characters from the Stargate television series. Dave the Quick, for instance, is a nod to a PvP team member from Blizzard's internal Pandemic group. Other names reference community figures, developers, and pop culture Easter eggs. Portraits and banners inside also reference Second War heroes, blending these real-world Easter eggs with in-game lore. It creates a hall that functions both as a gameplay service location and as a memorial space, honouring Alliance heroes, whether they're from Warcraft history or Blizzard development history. This dual purpose, functional and commemorative, makes Champions Hall feel more significant than a simple vendor location. When PvP-focused players visit to purchase gear with their hard-earned honour points, they're entering a space that acknowledges their dedication. The building says, "You've proven yourself in combat. You've earned the right to stand among champions. Here is your reward." Later patches would open Champions Hall to all players and eventually remove its instanced nature, integrating it fully into Stormwind's geography. But in Classic, particularly in the earliest versions of Vanilla, it retained that exclusive quality. You had to earn your way in. And once inside, you were surrounded by reminders that you joined a tradition of Alliance warriors, stretching back through Warcraft's history. The alley that almost exists. Now let's talk about one of Old Town's most interesting spaces, one that exists in lore and player imagination, more than in actual game geometry. Cutthroat Alley. In fan discussions and in some quest text, there are references to Cutthroat Alley, envisioned as a criminal, knife-in-the-dark corner of Old Town that fits perfectly with the SI7 and rogue fantasy. It's the kind of place where deals are made in shadows, where information is traded for gold, where the seedier side of Stormwind's underworld conducts business away from guard patrols. While not a fully separate district in Classic's actual map data, the idea of Cutthroat Alley became part of Stormwind's mystique. Players imagined a narrow, crime-ridden backstreet behind the Shady Lady Tavern, a place where rogues gathered, where black market goods changed hands, where the law didn't quite reach. And here's the fascinating thing. If you know where to look, you can actually find a physical representation of this concept. Cutthroat Alley exists as a narrow, shadowy dead-end space in Old Town, reachable only by dismounting and squeezing through a specific gap beside the Shady Lady Tavern. This overlooked nook is easy to miss. The entrance doesn't announce itself. You have to be exploring deliberately, paying attention to the geometry, looking for spaces that seem like they might lead somewhere. And when you find it, when you squeeze through that gap, you discover a genuinely atmospheric little space. Crates stacked in shadows, dim lighting. A dead-end alley that feels exactly like where criminal activity would happen. It's completely unnecessary for gameplay. No quest sends you there. No NPC waits in that alley. No treasure chest rewards your exploration. But it exists anyway. A detail added by level designers who understood that a city feels more real when it has spaces like this. Corners that suggest stories happening beyond player interaction. Cutthroat Alley becomes significant because players made it significant. It's a space for role players to claim, for rogues to meet away from crowds, for those rare players who explore every corner of the game world to discover and share with others. It's world building through negative space, through what isn't explicitly shown or explained. The Tavern of Shadows. The Shady Lady Tavern sits right on the conceptual edge of where Cutthroat Alley would be, and it serves as a perfect entrance to Old Town's underworld flavour. This isn't the Pig and Whistle with its respectable inn services. This is seedier, darker, the kind of place where conversations happen in low voices and strangers keep their hoods up. The Shady Lady's patrons and back rooms match the Thieves' Guild atmosphere of Old Town. NPCs here feel less like friendly merchants and more like people involved in activities they prefer the guards didn't know about. The tavern acts as a soft boundary between respectable Old Town, the rogue trainers, the SI-7 headquarters, the Champions Hall, and the implied criminal backstreets beyond. It's atmospheric world building. Not every building in Stormwind needs to be bright and welcoming. A real city has places like the Shady Lady, establishments that cater to clientele who prefer shadows to sunshine, where business happens that wouldn't be discussed in Cathedral Square. The tavern's positioning, right there at the entrance to that hidden alley, reinforces its role. You want to access the deepest, most hidden part of Old Town? You go through the Shady Lady first. It's both a physical gateway and a thematic one, marking the transition from Stormwind's public face to its criminal underbelly. Whispers of unused infrastructure. As you explore the canals that wind through Stormwind, you might notice something curious. An unused sewer. Great entrance that appears like it should lead somewhere but cannot be entered in Classic. This fake utility detail fed player myths that a sewer dungeon or secret thief route existed beneath the city. Players in Vanilla and Classic would try to interact with the grate, wondering if there was a way to open it, if it connected to the stockade somehow, if it was content that had been cut from the game or saved for later development. The truth is more mundane. Many MMOs, especially during early 2000s development, had planned features that didn't make it to launch. Stormwind's development included ideas for more complex underground systems, additional dungeons, alternate routes through the city. Some of these ideas left traces, doors that don't open, grates that don't lead anywhere, spaces that suggest functionality without providing it. But functionally, these unused elements serve a purpose. They make Stormwind feel like it has infrastructure beyond what players can access. A real city has sewers, maintenance tunnels, service passages that citizens don't normally see. The presence of that sealed grate, even though it's non-functional, suggests Stormwind has those systems too. You just can't access them. It's realism through limitation. Not everything is for you. Some doors stay closed. Some systems operate beyond player interaction, and that makes the city feel more like a place that exists for its own reasons, not just as a stage for player activity. The prison beneath. Let's talk about the stockades, because this dungeon represents something unique in World of Warcraft. A fully functional prison, literally embedded in a capital city. The stockade's entrance is located right there in Stormwind, along the canals near the Mage Quarter. Just an unassuming canal-side doorway with guards posted outside and wanted posters on the walls. You could walk past it dozens of times without realizing it's the entrance to an entire dungeon instance. That understated entrance reinforces a crucial idea. The stockades isn't some exotic adventure location. It's infrastructure. It's part of Stormwind's criminal justice system. The kingdom arrests criminals. They need somewhere to keep them, so there's a prison beneath the city streets. Simple, practical, real. The lore around the stockades adds depth. This is Stormwind's high-security prison, housing violent criminals, Defias insurgents, political prisoners, murderers, and rogues who cross the kingdom's laws. It's presided over by Warden Thelwater, and under normal circumstances, it would be heavily guarded and tightly controlled. But as players discover through quest text and dungeon lore, there's been a revolt. The prisoners have overtaken the guards. The stockades is now under inmate control, and Warden Thelwater is calling for adventurers to go in and put down the uprising. This creates a fantastic premise for a low-level dungeon. You're not travelling to some distant exotic location. You're descending into Stormwind's own prison, fighting through rioting convicts, hunting down the revolt's ringleader. It's urban, it's immediate, it's a threat right here in the heart of the Alliance capital. The stockade's position beneath Stormwind also makes it effectively Alliance only, despite being technically accessible to Horde players through the Dungeon Finder in the later systems. But realistically, a Horde player trying to physically reach the stockade's entrance in Stormwind City would face overwhelming guard presence. The dungeon's location makes it a distinctly Alliance experience. Inside the stockades, the dungeon is designed as a series of prison corridors with cells on either side. It's claustrophobic, linear, filled with inmates who've broken free and guards who've been overwhelmed. You encounter various bosses representing different criminal elements. Targor the Dread, a Blackrock orc sentenced to death. Dextrin Ward, a grave robber who sold bodies to necromancers. And ultimately, Basil Thread, the mastermind behind the revolt. These aren't random monsters. They're criminals with backstories, with reasons they're imprisoned, with connections to other parts of Stormwind's lore. Basil Thread, for instance, was Edwin Van Cleef's lieutenant in the Stonemasons Guild captured during the riots. His presence in the stockades ties the dungeon directly to the Defias Brotherhood storyline. The stockades reinforces Stormwind's identity as a functioning capital with real infrastructure and real problems. The city doesn't just have markets and cathedrals, it has a criminal justice system. It imprisons dangerous people. And sometimes, those systems fail, requiring intervention. That intervention happens to be you, the player descending into the darkness beneath Stormwind streets to restore order. The weight of stone and shadow. As we conclude this tour through Old Town and the spaces beneath it, let's step back and appreciate what this district represents in Stormwind's overall design. Old Town is where the city acknowledges its shadows. Every civilization has elements it would rather not display prominently. intelligence services conducting morally ambiguous operations, soldiers training for brutal combat, criminals imprisoned beneath the streets, taverns where questionable deals are struck, alleys where the law doesn't quite reach. Stormwind doesn't hide these elements. It gives them a district. It puts them in Old Town, away from the cathedral's brightness and the trade district's bustle, but still present, still acknowledged, still part of what makes the kingdom function. This creates depth. Stormwind isn't just a fantasy of marble and virtue, it's a complex political entity that does what's necessary to survive in a dangerous world. SI. 7 assassinates threats. Champions Hall trains warriors for brutal PvP warfare. The Stockades imprisons criminals, and when they revolt, adventurers are hired to kill them. These are the realities of statecraft and survival that don't happen in throne room speeches, but are essential to keeping the kingdom standing. Old Town gives them physical space, makes them visible, integrates them into Stormwind's identity. And that makes Stormwind feel real, not sanitized, not simplified, real. A capital that has learned to survive by using every tool at its disposal, including the ones that live in shadows. Section 7. Nature within stone. We've explored Stormwind's shadows in Old Town, seen its criminal justice system in the Stockades, walked through its military and intelligence infrastructure. Now let's move to something completely different. The park, Stormwind's nature district, and what it represents about the Alliance's multiracial character. A district unlike any other. The park sits in the western corner of Stormwind City, accessible from both Cathedral Square to the southwest and the Mage Quarter to the northwest. And the moment you step into it, you know you've left the stone thoroughfares of humanity's capital behind. This is the only district in Classic Stormwind where trees dominate the landscape. Grass covers the ground. Open sky stretches overhead without the shadows of tall buildings. The architecture is minimal, functional, designed to support rather than dominate the natural space. The park isn't trying to be impressive, it's trying to be restful. The district was originally conceived as leisure space for Stormwind's human population. A place to escape the density of urban life, to breathe open air, to let children play safely within the city walls. Parks serve this purpose in real cities, and Stormwind's designers understood that a truly complete capital needed one too. But over time, the park evolved beyond its original human-focused purpose. When the Night Elves joined the Alliance after the Third War, they began arriving in Stormwind as visitors, diplomats, traders, and adventurers. And for those Night Elves, the park became something more. A refuge. The Night Elf Quarter. Imagine being a Night Elf, arriving in Stormwind for the first time. You've come from Teldrassil, or Darnassus, cities built within and around massive trees, where nature and civilization blend seamlessly. Architecture in Night Elf culture doesn't dominate the landscape. It works with it, grows from it, respects it. Then you arrive in Stormwind, stone everywhere, walls and bridges and towers of carved white rock, canals cutting through artificial channels, everything structured, geometric, separated into walled districts. It's impressive, yes. The craftsmanship is undeniable. But it's fundamentally alien to how you've experienced civilization your entire long life. Until you find the park. Here finally is something familiar. Trees, grass, space where nature hasn't been controlled and carved into submission. A district It feels more like Darnassus than the rest of Stormwind, and so the Night Elves gravitated here, made it their unofficial district, created a cultural enclave within the human capital. The park came to be called the Night Elf District by players, and for good reason. Walk through it in Classic, and you'll see more Night Elf NPCs than anywhere else in Stormwind. They're not just visiting, they've established a presence. The park is theirs in spirit, even though it remains technically part of Stormwind City proper. This organic evolution of the district's purpose says something important about the Alliance. The organisation isn't purely human, despite Stormwind being its de facto capital. It's multiracial by necessity, and, increasingly, by choice. When the Night Elves needed space in Stormwind, the humans didn't force them to adapt entirely to human architectural norms. They allowed the park to become what the Night Elves needed it to be. That's how real alliances work. Compromise, adaptation, finding space for different cultures to exist without surrendering what makes them distinct. The Moonwell. At the centre of the park, on a raised platform, accessible by stairs, sits one of the most significant pieces of Night Elf culture in the Eastern Kingdoms, a Moonwell. For Night Elf players, Moonwells are familiar features of their homeland. These sacred pools of water, blessed by the moon, goddess Elune, serve multiple purposes. They're spiritual sites for prayer and contemplation. They're sources of magical power for druids and priests. In gameplay terms, tailors can use moonwells to craft mooncloth, a valuable high-level material. The Stormwind Park Moonwell is the only one in the entire Eastern Kingdoms in Classic WoW. If you're an Alliance tailor on this continent and you need to craft mooncloth, this is where you come. If you're a Night Elf character who wants to stand beside water, blessed by a loon without travelling back to Kalimdor, this is your destination. The Moonwell's placement in the park creates a physical and symbolic centre for the Night Elf presence in Stormwind. It marks the district as sacred space, not just leisure space. It declares that Night Elf spiritual practices are welcome in the Alliance capital, that their goddess can be honoured here, even in this city of stone and humans. For role-players, the Moonwell becomes a gathering point. Night Elf characters meet here to discuss matters of their people, to pray together, to maintain cultural connections while far from home. It's not Darnassus, but it's a piece of Darnassus transplanted to human lands. The Moonwell also serves practical purposes that bind the Alliance together economically and socially. When human tailors need to craft mooncloth, they come to the park, interact with Night Elf NPCs, use a sacred pool built by another culture. That simple crafting action reinforces interdependence. The Alliance works because its different peoples need each other, respect each other's traditions, make space for each other's sacred practices. The Druid Trainers. Clustered near the Moonwell, you'll find the park's most important NPCs for certain classes. The Druid Trainers. In Classic WoW, Druidism is practiced by only two Alliance races, Night Elves, and, after the introduction of the Exodar, Draenei. But the Night Elves are the masters of this ancient art, the keepers of druidic knowledge stretching back 10,000 years to the War of the Ancients. The park houses druid trainers like Sheldris Moontree and Theridrin. These aren't just NPCs who teach you new abilities when you level up. They represent the presence of the Cenarian Circle in Stormwind, the druidic organisation that maintains balance between civilization and nature, between progress and preservation. What makes the park's druid trainers significant is their uniqueness. This is the only location in the entire Eastern Kingdoms where druids can train in Classic. If you're a night elf, druid questing in Westfall, Red Ridge, Duskwood, or any other human territory, and you hit a new level, you have two choices. Travel back to Darnassus via boat and flight path, or come to Stormwind's Park. Most druids choose the park. It's closer, it's more convenient. And over time, this practical reality reinforces the park's role as a night elf, cultural centre. Druid players spend time here, waiting between quests, chatting with other druids, establishing the district as their home away from home. The trainers themselves are often standing or sitting near the Moonwell, emphasizing the connection between druidic magic and the sacred waters of Elune. They're dressed in traditional night elf garb, surrounded by trees, teaching ancient nature magic in the middle of a human city. It's a beautiful visual metaphor for the Alliance's diversity. For players who aren't druids, the presence of these trainers makes the park feel purposeful. You might not have business with them personally, but their existence gives the district identity. This is where druids live in Stormwind. This is where that particular kind of magic is practiced and passed down. Lunar festival and cultural events. The park's most significant moment in the vanilla WoW calendar comes during the Lunar Festival, an in-game celebration of night elf culture and the moon goddess Elune. During this annual event, which typically ran in February, the park transformed. Special NPCs appeared, festival decorations were hung, fireworks lit the night sky. The normally quiet district became a hub of activity, with players congregating to participate in festival activities, exchange items, and celebrate night elf culture, even if they weren't playing night elf characters themselves. The Lunar Festival turned the park into the one district in Stormwind where something actually happened regularly. The rest of the city was functionally consistent year-round. The Cathedral stayed the same. Old Town never changed. But the park had seasons, had cultural moments, had events that transformed it temporarily before returning to its usual peaceful state. This seasonal variation made the park feel more alive in some ways. Real parks change with the seasons. They're venues for festivals and gatherings and community events that wouldn't fit in more formal spaces. Stormwind's Park served that function within the game world, creating memories for players who experienced those festival nights when the western corner of the city became the centre of Alliance attention. The Lunar Festival also reinforced a crucial idea. Night elf culture wasn't just tolerated within the Alliance, it was celebrated. Human players came to the park during the festival to participate in night elf traditions, to honour Elune, even though she wasn't their goddess, to experience another culture's practices respectfully. It's the Alliance ideal, working as intended, not assimilation where everyone becomes human, not segregation where different races ignore each other, but integration where cultures maintain their distinctiveness while sharing their traditions with others who choose to participate. The peaceful character. Beyond its cultural and practical significance, the park serves one more essential purpose. It's peaceful. There are no major quest hubs in the park, no densely packed vendor areas where players crowd together to buy and sell, no auction house generating constant traffic, no dungeon entrances pulling groups through on their way to content. The park is quiet. It exists for its own sake as a space of calm within a busy city. Players come here when they want a break from the chaos of the trade district, when they need somewhere green and open to just exist for a moment. This might seem like poor game design. Why create a district with minimal gameplay purpose? Why dedicate development resources to a space that doesn't drive players toward objectives? But this perspective misses what makes virtual worlds feel real. Real cities have spaces that aren't purely functional, that exist for rest and contemplation, where nothing particular happens, and that's exactly the point. Stormwind's Park understands this. It's not optimized for efficiency. It's designed for atmosphere, for the feeling of a complete city rather than a purely utilitarian game space. The tree-shaded paths through the park became walking routes for players who enjoyed role-playing, who wanted to experience Stormwind as a place rather than just a services hub. The grass became sitting areas where players could stop and chat without the visual chaos of dozens of other people running past on mounts. For some players, the park was their favourite district precisely because nothing happened there. It was an escape within an escape, a peaceful corner of a virtual world where you could step away from quests and combat and levelling pressure. A space between worlds. Here's something subtle about the park's design that you might not consciously notice. It exists as a bridge space between Stormwind's different architectural districts. The park sits between the Mage Quarter and Cathedral Square, two areas with very distinct aesthetics. The Mage Quarter has towers and arcane atmosphere, purple and blue tones, a sense of mystical study. Cathedral Square is all soaring Gothic architecture, white stone, religious grandeur. The park sits between them as a neutral zone, a space that's neither arcane nor religious, neither scholarly nor ceremonial. Just nature. Trees don't take sides in doctrinal disputes. Grass doesn't care about magical schools or divine power. The park creates breathing room between Stormwind's more intense ideological spaces. This positioning makes the park a good meeting place for players from different guilds, different factions within the Alliance, different playstyles. If you're organizing a raid and your members are scattered across the city, saying, "Meet in the park," provides neutral ground. Nobody's home territory. Everybody's equally comfortable there. It's a small thing, but it's another example of how Stormwind's layout creates social dynamics through environmental design. The spaces we inhabit shape how we interact. The park's openness and neutrality foster certain kinds of player behavior that wouldn't happen as naturally in more defined, purpose-driven districts. What the park represents. Let's pull back and consider what the park means in the larger context of Stormwind's design and the Alliance's identity. This is a district that exists primarily to accommodate another race's cultural needs. The humans built it, but they allowed it to be transformed by Night Elf presence into something that serves both peoples. That's not conquest or assimilation. That's partnership. The Moonwell, the Druid trainers, the Lunar Festival celebrations, the quiet green spaces that let Night Elves feel somewhat at home in a very human city. These elements make a statement about what kind of organization the Alliance aspires to be. Yes, it's headquartered in a human capital. Yes, much of its military power flows from human and dwarven forces, but it makes space for nature-focused druids, respects moon goddess worship, celebrates night elf cultural traditions, and recognizes that not everyone in the Alliance wants to live surrounded by stone towers and canals. The park is proof that the Alliance can adapt, can incorporate different worldviews without demanding uniformity, and that flexibility, that willingness to let different cultures maintain their distinctiveness, is what makes the Alliance more than just a military treaty. It makes it a living, evolving coalition where different peoples genuinely try to accommodate each other's needs and values. Section 8. Community and Connection. We've explored Stormwind's physical spaces thoroughly, its history, its districts, its infrastructure. Now let's talk about what makes Stormwind feel alive beyond its architecture and NPCs. Let's talk about the players themselves, about the social fabric that turns a well-designed city into a living community. The Mage Quarter and arcane learning. Before we dive into community dynamics, let's spend some time in a district we've referenced but not fully explored, the Mage Quarter. This district sits in Stormwind's northwestern section, accessible from both the trade district and the park. It's dominated by a tall tower in its centre, the Wizard's Sanctum, where mages train and practice their arcane arts. The Mage Quarter has a distinct atmosphere compared to other districts. Where the Cathedral district feels solemn and sacred, where Old Town feels shadowy and dangerous, the Mage Quarter feels studious, intellectual. There's an energy here that suggests constant magical practice, experimentation, and learning. Mage trainers are clustered in this district, teaching spells to aspiring wizards and warlocks. The Wizard's Sanctum Tower itself serves as a hub for arcane education, with mage NPCs standing ready to train players in new abilities as they level up. What's interesting about the Mage Quarter from a design perspective is how it reinforces class identity through environmental detail. If you're a mage, this is your district. This is where you come to learn new spells, where you pick up portal training, where you're surrounded by NPCs who share your magical focus. It makes being a mage feel like membership in a scholarly tradition, not just possessing certain gameplay abilities. The tower itself becomes a familiar landmark for mage players. You know that spiral path winding around it. You've climbed those stairs dozens of times. It's your professional home within Stormwind. And crucially in Classic WoW. This is where mage portals deposit players when they teleport to Stormwind. If a mage in Ironforge casts Portal Stormwind and their party members step through, they emerge inside this tower. The Mage Quarter becomes the magical gateway into the city, the first place many players see when arriving via arcane transportation.